All right, guys. So I think that this is completely, wildly unconscionable. As I was saying before, you will recall before that Biden-Trump debate, there were questions about whether Trump had tested positive for COVID and knew he potentially had COVID when he went to debate Joe Biden, because just days later, it comes out that he has COVID. He gets very sick, has to be hospitalized. I mean, some of the details after the fact is it was really ugly there for him for a time. I mean, his life was truly in danger. So, and they were always really squishy about when did you get the first positive COVID test? They would never give really straight answers about that. Well, Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, is out with a new book. And this has been confirmed not just by Meadows, but other people who are former aides to Trump at this point, according to reporters at the New York Times and other places. Trump did, in fact, receive a positive COVID test before that debate. Let's go ahead and throw this tear sheet up on the screen. This is from The Guardian. Trump tested positive for COVID few days before Biden debate, chief of staff says in new book. He was feeling not too great. He took a test. He was on Air Force One. Meadows describes a pretty dramatic scene where they get a call and they say, stop the plane because the president has tested positive for COVID. Trump basically says like, oh shit. They do another test. The second one comes back negative. And so then he's like, okay, well, we're good to go. Let's just go forward with everything. Even though he's feeling poorly, even though he got the first positive test, even though they know. And Meadows says he told all the staff to treat Trump on that trip, I think was to Pennsylvania, as if he had coronavirus. So Meadows and the staff knew there was a good chance that he had COVID, but he just pushes forward as if absolutely nothing has happened. And the consequences of this, I mean, first of all, what kind of a person? Like, I think we all know the type of precautions that we've been taking in this era to keep the people that we love, anybody around us, safe from this disease, especially in a time before there were vaccinations. Joe Biden is an old man. He was at incredible risk. And Trump is an old man. I mean, and he's hanging around with a lot of people who are old people. And so we all know the sort of precautions that we took over these years, especially before we were vaccinated, to make sure that the people around us were safe if we even had the tiniest suspicion of anything. And so for the president to go to this debate knowing that he potentially had COVID, and then it gets even worse than that. Let's throw this Military Times tear sheet up on the screen. So not only did he do that debate, not only did he have an indoor press conference and apparently brief the press on Air Force One, some of the reporters ended up getting COVID from that.
Yeah, that's right.
He then went and did an event with Gold Star military families that was also indoors. And then I don't know if you guys remember this, because so much of it is like, you know, with Trump, there's so much happens that it's hard to hold on to all the details. But he basically, when he did come down with COVID, he effectively blamed these Gold Star families for giving it to him.
Well, yeah, they were like, they hugged Hope Hicks.
He said, I went through like 35 people and everyone has a different story. They come within an inch of my face. Sometimes they want to hug me and they want to kiss me, and they do. And frankly, I'm not telling them to back up. I'm not doing it, but obviously it's a dangerous thing, I guess, if you go by the COVID thing. So he basically blamed them for giving him COVID, when the reality was he was putting all of these families who have lost so much already at tremendous risk because of his own just completely selfish and irresponsible behavior. Yeah. It's disgusting reflection on who he is as a human being.
It's really strange, too, because the timeline also really never added up. And actually, other aides at the White House, Alyssa Farrow, she was talking this morning, where she was saying, like, look, I actually asked a lot of times, when was the actual first positive test for the president? And she was never given a clear answer. Yeah, wow. And she was strategic communications director at the White House. So just to give you a little bit of a preview into how this works. So from Mark Meadows' book, he said that he tested positive and that there was another test then after the tested negative, and that after that period, they didn't do any more tests, including up to the actual presidential debate.
When they were supposed to.
Exactly. So the president was supposed, and this also goes, was this intentional or not? The president was supposed to be tested before that debate with Biden, but because he relied on late, and because he was the president, they were like, well, he says he's negative, so
yeah, they said,
the honor system.
We're
going to go on the honor system for the president. is the president. I assume he was probably tested more than any individual on planet Earth, or at least that's what we all thought at the time. Yeah, it's a very revealing thing into Trump. And what I see in particular from Mark Meadows is has this bumbling attitude here in the book, as if he was like, he didn't really know what to do. And he was like, well, you know, it's like, come on. I mean, at that point, you have Secret Service agents, you have staff who are traveling with him, you have the Gold Star families, you have so many more. You actually have a lot of control over who Trump would interact with or not. I mean, look, I've talked with some people who worked in the White House before, not necessarily under the Trump administration. There are safety protocols and more where the Secret Service and them can jump in and say, look, for your own good, like, we're taking over. And I mean, in, you know, like 9/11 type circumstances. I don't know necessarily if this qualified or not, but, you know, with these tests, because I assume these are those rapid tests, one of the things is that if you test positive on them, you are very, very likely to be positive. That was something that was reiterated to me whenever I had to take those at-home COVID tests, is that, yeah, they might get a false negative, but getting a false positive is actually quite
Much
rare
more,
in order to look at it. And so then, you know, yes, and again, it would make sense because they're talking exactly about those Binax system rapid antigen tests where the next one might be negative, but, you know, even that very comes to interpretation. I don't know if you guys have ever done these, but there's like 2 lines, and the second line, especially when you're coming out of COVID and you're trying to see if you're still testing positive, or when you're going into it, it's a little iffy on the interpretation exactly. But, you know, when you see any kind of anything there, it's pretty clear that you probably have COVID. And this is how it's been explained to me in terms of the test. So look, you probably had COVID in those 3 days before, especially if he wasn't feeling good.
He wasn't feeling good when he tested positive. He was in the hospital the next week.
Well, yeah, right. Went to the hospital 3 days later, and we'll remember, he had a very bizarre performance in that debate.
Yes, that was the one where he was like totally unhinged.
Where he was unhinged, and people thought, oh, you know, this is just like, was his strategy, or like, you know, look, I mean, whenever you're not feeling 100%, you're much more likely to behave erratically.
Yeah, he may have been half delirious.
Very, very, very much could have been. And look, he was, 74 years old at the time that was happening. It's really not a joke. And that's why he was ultimately rushed to the hospital. Since then, it's actually come out that while he was in the hospital, that his situation was much more dire than the doctors let on. Like, his blood oxygen levels and more were much lower, and they were very, very concerned for him. That's why he was given Regeneron and a few other things. And I think the most stunning image that will always resonate in my mind, because I do think this actually, out of all that was the craziest part of the Trump presidency, is when he got COVID. I truly thought he could die. I was like, this is crazy.
He really could have. Yeah.
And whenever remember he came back on Marine One and he ran up the stairs and he was just breathing so heavily when he was on, I think it was on the Truman balcony. I can't remember exactly. And he like put his fist up in the air and I was like, man, he does not look good.
I think he probably would breathe pretty heavy running up a set of stairs on any.
Very likely, yes.
But yes, he did not look good. And when he went to Walter Reed and he walked, I mean, terrible. It was terrible. And the other thing that we've learned since this, according to Chris Christie, is so Christie was in the debate prep room.
Right.
And in a hotel room. I mean, they're all close together, right, prepping for this debate. He comes down with COVID. Obviously, former Governor Christie has struggled with his weight his entire life. And he's at tremendous risk, also not a spring chicken. That man almost died. You were saying they administered him last rites.
He said they administered last rites to him in the hospital.
And according to him, this is his side of the story, Trump calls not to check on him, not to wish him well, but to make sure he's not going to say that he got it from Trump. That's the kind of guy this is. That's the kind of guy this is. It's just, listen, we try not to do too much Trump derangement here, but this is a stunning insight into how this man operates, the type of personal, just ethical code or lack thereof that he has, because I cannot imagine treating my best friend or my worst enemy the way that he callously treated everyone around him in that time period. Everyone from his close advisors in the room with him, to the press corps, to Joe Biden, to the Gold Star families, just pushing forward totally callously, no regard whatsoever for their safety or well-being. And I mean, it's just, I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine behaving that way. It's truly disgusting. And the last thing in terms of the timeline, the thing that led up to, that happened right before he gets his first positive test was that Amy Coney Barrett
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
swearing
that's
in a ceremony.
Yes, where it was
ended up-
outdoors and it ended up being a major super
It
spreader.
ended up being major super spreader. Isn't that when Hope Hicks got
That's
it?
also when Hope Hicks got
A
it.
bunch of people that were at that ceremony came down with COVID. And then, it was very shortly after, it may have been the next day, that Trump got this first positive test and wasn't feeling well. So anyway, disgusting all the way around.
There we go.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.